The muddy water swirled around Tessa O'Brien's waist as she clung to the gnarled cottonwood branch, her fingers already numb from the cold and her arms trembling with exhaustion as the river rose higher with every passing second. She had been foolish to attempt the crossing alone. The storm clouds had gathered so quickly over the red rock canyons surrounding Silver Reef, Utah, and what had been a shallow ford that morning had transformed into a churning torrent by afternoon. Her horse had panicked halfway across, throwing her before swimming frantically back to the western bank, leaving Tessa stranded on a partially submerged sandbar that was disappearing beneath the rising current. She had managed to grab hold of the cottonwood, but she could feel her strength fading, and the realization that she might die here, alone and cold, sent waves of panic through her chest. The year was 1879, and Tessa had come to Silver Reef 3 months earlier with her father, a mining engineer hired to assess the sandstone silver deposits that had made this remote Utah settlement unexpectedly prosperous. At 22 years old, she had left behind a comfortable life in St. Louis to accompany her widowed father west, partly out of duty and partly out of a desperate need to escape the suffocating expectations of polite society. She had imagined adventure and freedom in the territories, but she had not imagined dying in a flash flood. The water climbed higher, reaching her chest now, and Tessa tried to pull herself up the branch, but her wet skirts weighed her down like anchors. Her bonnet had been torn away by the current, and her long auburn hair plastered itself across her face. She could barely see through the rain and spray, but she thought she heard something over the roar of the water. A shout, perhaps, or was it just the wind howling through the canyon? Then she saw him. A rider on horseback, emerging from the sheets of rain on the eastern bank. He sat tall in the saddle, and even through the storm she could see him assessing the situation, his gaze locked on her. For a moment she thought he might turn back, that he would decide the risk was too great, and she would not have blamed him. The river was a monster now, full of debris and swift enough to sweep away anything in its path. But then the rider spurred his horse forward, directly into the current. Tessa watched in astonishment as horse and rider plunged into the raging water. The horse was a big bay gelding, powerful and steady, and the cowboy sat him with absolute confidence, guiding the animal diagonally across the current rather than fighting it head-on. The water rose to the horse's chest, then to its neck, but the gelding kept moving, muscles bunching beneath its wet hide as it fought for every foot of progress. The cowboy's hat was pulled low, rain streaming from the wide brim, but as he drew closer, Tessa could see his face. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with strong features and intense dark eyes that never left her. His jaw was set with determination, and there was something in his expression that made her believe, for the first time since the water had begun to rise, that she might actually survive this. "Hold on," he shouted over the roar of the flood. "Just hold on a little longer." Tessa tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too hard. She tightened her grip on the branch, feeling splinters dig into her palms. The water was at her shoulders now, and she had to tilt her head back to keep her face above the surface. The sandbar beneath her feet had disappeared completely. The cowboy brought his horse alongside the cottonwood, fighting to keep the animal steady in the current. He was close enough now that Tessa could see water streaming down his face, could see the muscles in his arms as he controlled the nervous horse with one hand, while reaching toward her with the other. "You need to let go of the branch," he said, his voice strong and calm despite the chaos around them. "Reach for my hand." "I cannot," Tessa gasped. "If I let go, the current will take me." "The current will take you anyway if you stay here. That tree is going to come down any minute." "Do you trust me?" It was an absurd question. She did not even know his name. But something in his eyes, some quality of absolute certainty, made her nod. "On three," he said. 1, 2, 3. Tessa released the branch and reached for him. For a terrifying instant, she felt the water grab her, pulling her away, but then his hand clamped around her wrist like iron. He hauled her toward the horse with strength that seemed impossible, and she scrabbled for purchase against the gelding's wet shoulder. The cowboy shifted his weight, pulling her up and forward, and somehow she found herself in front of him in the saddle, his arm locked around her waist. "Hold onto the saddle horn," he commanded, and she obeyed, gripping the leather-wrapped horn with both hands. She could feel his chest against her back, solid and warm despite the rain, could feel the power in his arm as he held her secure and guided the horse with his other hand. The gelding needed no encouragement to turn back toward the eastern shore. The animal lunged through the current, nostrils flaring, and the cowboy leaned forward, his body sheltering Tessa from the worst of the wind. She could hear him speaking to the horse, low words of encouragement, and she felt the animal respond, digging deep for strength. The crossing seemed to take forever. Tessa was aware of debris rushing past them, of the terrible power of the water trying to sweep them downstream, of the horse's labored breathing and the cowboy's steady presence behind her. She closed her eyes and prayed, something she had not done in years, and made bargains with God that she knew she would never keep. Then the horse's hooves struck solid ground. The gelding lunged up the muddy bank, water streaming from its sides, and suddenly they were out of the river and standing on firm earth. The cowboy did not stop until they were well away from the water, up on higher ground where a stand of juniper trees offered some shelter from the wind. He dismounted in one fluid motion and reached up to help Tessa down. Her legs would not hold her, and she would have collapsed if he had not caught her. He lowered her carefully to sit against a tree trunk, then immediately stripped off his oilskin coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was still warm from his body, and Tessa pulled it close, shivering violently. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. "You saved my life." "Let me get a fire started," he said, already moving to gather what dry wood he could find beneath the overhanging rock nearby. "You need to get warm." Tessa watched him work, still dazed by what had just happened. He moved with quick efficiency, building a small fire in a sheltered spot and coaxing it to life despite the damp conditions. When the flames were crackling steadily, he came back to her and helped her move closer to the warmth. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, crouching beside her. His dark eyes searched her face with concern. "Tessa O'Brien," she said. "My father is Martin O'Brien, the mining engineer. We have been living in Silver Reef since March." "I know your father," the cowboy said. "Good man. I am Flynn Calhoun. I work for the Harrison Ranch about 5 miles east of town. You risked your life for me, Mr. Calhoun." "Flynn," he corrected. "And I could not very well leave you to drown." "What were you doing trying to cross alone in weather like this?" Tessa felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I had gone riding this morning before the storm. I was on the western side of the river when the rain started, and I thought I could make it across before it got too bad. I was wrong." "That was dangerous," Flynn said, but his tone was not harsh. "This country does not forgive mistakes." "I am learning that," Tessa said quietly. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the full weight of what had almost happened was settling over her. She had come within minutes, perhaps seconds, of dying. If Flynn had not appeared when he did, if he had not been brave enough to ride into that current, she would be dead now, her body swept downstream to be found days or weeks later, if ever. "Hey," Flynn said softly, and she realized tears were running down her face, mixing with the rain water already there. "You are safe now. It is going to be all right." Without thinking, Tessa reached out and gripped his hand. Flynn did not pull away. He stayed crouched beside her, his rough, calloused hand warm around hers, until her shaking began to subside. They could not return to town that evening. The storm continued to rage, and even away from the river, the conditions were too dangerous for travel. Flynn had some supplies in his saddlebags, including a bedroll and some dried beef, and he did his best to make Tessa comfortable. He gave her the bedroll and sat up through the night keeping the fire fed, checking on her regularly to make sure she was warm enough. Tessa dozed fitfully, exhausted but too overwrought to sleep deeply. Every time she stirred, she saw Flynn silhouetted against the firelight, watchful and alert. There was something profoundly comforting about his presence, and she found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. He had a strong profile, with a straight nose and a firm chin darkened by several days' worth of stubble. His hands, when he fed wood to the fire, moved with competence and care. He was not a large man, but there was a wiry strength to him, a sense of capability that went beyond mere physical power. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and new. The river was still high, but no longer the raging torrent it had been the previous afternoon. Flynn helped Tessa mount his horse, then swung up behind her, and they rode slowly back toward Silver Reef. The town was built on a sandstone ridge, its weathered buildings clustered around the silver mines that had brought prosperity to this remote corner of Utah. As they rode down the main street, people stopped to stare. Tessa knew she must look a sight, her dress torn and muddy, her hair wild, riding in front of a cowboy on his horse with his coat wrapped around her shoulders. Flynn took her directly to her father's house, a modest frame dwelling near the edge of town. Martin O'Brien came bursting out the front door before they had even dismounted, his face gray with worry. "Tessa, thank God, I have been out of my mind. When your horse came back without you yesterday and the storm came in, I thought." His voice broke. "I am all right, Papa," Tessa said as Flynn helped her down. Her legs were steadier now, though she was stiff and sore. "Mr. Calhoun saved me. I was caught in the river and he rowed out and pulled me to safety." Martin O'Brien turned to Flynn, and for a moment Tessa thought her father might actually embrace the cowboy. "How can I ever thank you? You have given me back my daughter." "No thanks necessary, sir," Flynn said quietly. "I am just glad I came along when I did." "You must come inside, have some hot food, warm yourself," Martin insisted. "I appreciate the offer, but I need to get back to the ranch. I was out looking for strays when I saw Miss O'Brien. My boss will be wondering what happened to me." "Then come for dinner tomorrow night," Martin pressed. "Please, it would mean a great deal to me." Flynn glanced at Tessa, and she felt a strange flutter in her chest when their eyes met. "All right," he said finally. "Tomorrow night." He tipped his hat to them both, then mounted his horse and rode off down the street. Tessa watched him go, still wrapped in his coat, which smelled of leather and wood smoke and something else she could not quite name. Her father ushered her inside, insisting she have a hot bath and put on dry clothes. "The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen," a Chinese woman whose husband worked in the mines, clucked over Tessa and made her drink hot tea laced with honey. Once Tessa was warm and dry and dressed in clean clothes, she found herself unable to stop thinking about Flynn Calhoun. She kept seeing his face through the rain, the determination in his eyes, feeling the strength of his arm around her waist as he pulled her to safety. That night she slept deeply, exhausted by her ordeal, but her dreams were filled with images of churning water and a dark-eyed cowboy who rode fearlessly into danger to reach her. The next evening, Tessa took special care with her appearance, choosing a dress of deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes. She told herself, It was only proper to look presentable for a dinner guest, especially one who had saved her life. But she knew there was more to it than that. She wanted Flynn to see her at her best, not bedraggled and half-drowned. He arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes. He had brought a bottle of whiskey for her father and a small bouquet of wildflowers for her, which he presented with an almost shy smile. "I know they are not much," he said, "but I saw them growing along the trail and thought of you." Tessa took the flowers, touched by the gesture. "They are lovely, thank you. Dinner was a pleasant affair." Flynn proved to be an intelligent and engaging conversationalist, and Martin O'Brien was clearly delighted with him. They discussed the mines, the challenges of ranching in this harsh country, and the political situation in the territory. Flynn had been born in Texas and had come to Utah 5 years earlier, working various jobs before signing on with the Harrison Ranch. He spoke little of his family, and Tessa sensed there was pain there, old wounds he preferred not to probe. After dinner, Martin suggested that Flynn might like to take a walk with Tessa, and despite the obvious manipulation, Tessa found she was grateful for her father's interference. She and Flynn strolled through the town as the sun set, painting the red rock cliffs in shades of gold and crimson. "Your father is a good man," Flynn said as they walked. "You are fortunate to have him." "I am," Tessa agreed. "After my mother died 3 years ago, he was lost for a while. I think coming out here has been good for him, given him a purpose again." "And what about you? Has it been good for you?" Tessa considered the question. "I thought I wanted adventure," she said slowly. "I thought I wanted to escape the constraints of my old life, but I am discovering that freedom can be frightening. There are no rules out here, no clear expectations. You have to figure out who you are and what you want, and that is harder than I expected." "I think I understand that," Flynn said. "I came west for similar reasons. I wanted to be my own man, not what my family expected me to be. And have you succeeded?" He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant horizon. "I am still working on it." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and Tessa found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her. Every time his arm accidentally brushed hers, she felt a tingle of awareness. When they reached the edge of town and turned back, Flynn spoke again. "I have been thinking about you," he said. "About what happened at the river. I know you were frightened, but you were also brave. A lot of people would have panicked and let go of that branch too soon or fought me when I tried to help. You kept your head." "I was terrified," Tessa admitted, "but I trusted you. I do not know why, since I had never seen you before in my life, but I did." Flynn stopped walking and turned to face her. In the fading light, his eyes were very dark and very serious. "I would like to call on you if you are amenable, properly, I mean, with your father's permission." Tessa's heart began to beat faster. "I would like that very much." "I am just a cowboy," Flynn said. "I do not have much to offer, but I am honest and I work hard, and I would never let any harm come to you." "You already proved that," Tessa said softly. She reached out and touched his hand, a brief contact that sent warmth flooding through her. "Yes, Flynn. Please call on me." He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face, and Tessa felt something shift in her chest. A door opening that she had not even realized was closed. Over the following weeks, Flynn became a regular presence in Tessa's life. He would ride into town on Sundays, his one day off from the ranch, and they would spend the afternoon together, walking or talking or sometimes just sitting on the porch of her father's house. Martin O'Brien approved wholeheartedly of the courtship, and Mrs. Chen always made sure there were fresh cookies or pie whenever Flynn visited. Tessa found herself falling for Flynn in a way she had never experienced before. The young men who had courted her in St. Louis had been polished and educated, but there had been something hollow about them, something false. Flynn was different. He was genuine in every word and action. When he spoke, he meant what he said. When he looked at her, she felt truly seen, not as an object or a prize, but as a person with her own thoughts and dreams and fears. Flynn seemed equally captivated by her. He told her once, as they sat watching the sunset from a high ridge outside town, that he had never met anyone like her. "You are not like the other women I have known," he said. "You are educated and refined, but you are also curious and brave. You want to understand things, not just accept them. You question the way things are." "Is that good or bad?" Tessa asked. "It is wonderful," Flynn said simply. "You are wonderful." They kissed for the first time that evening as the sky blazed orange and red above the desert. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, and when they pulled apart, Tessa felt as though she were glowing from the inside out. But their happiness was not without complications. The Harrison Ranch was demanding work, and Flynn often had to be away for days at a time, driving cattle or mending fences in the remote corners of the property. Tessa found herself counting the days until she would see him again, and the waiting was sometimes unbearable. Moreover, there were whispers in town. Some people thought it was improper for Tessa, the daughter of a respected engineer, to be courting a common cowboy. Mrs. Prescott, the banker's wife and the self-appointed guardian of Silver Reef's morals, made her disapproval clear. "Your father should put a stop to this," she told Tessa one afternoon in the general store. "That young man is beneath you. You could do so much better." Tessa felt anger flare hot in her chest. "Flynn Calhoun is worth 10 of the so-called respectable men in this town," she said coldly. "He is honest and brave and good. What more could I want?" Mrs. Prescott sniffed. "Mark my words, girl. You will regret throwing yourself away on a man with no prospects." But Tessa had no regrets. Every moment with Flynn felt like a gift, and she treasured each one. They talked about everything under the sun. He told her about his childhood in Texas, growing up on a small ranch that his father had eventually lost to debt and drought. She told him about her mother, a gentle woman who had loved music and poetry, and about the ache of loss that never quite went away. They discovered shared passions for literature and stargazing, and Flynn proved to have a keen intellect despite his limited formal education. Summer turned to autumn, and the heat gave way to cooler temperatures. The cottonwoods along the river turned gold, and the air took on a crisp quality. One Sunday in October, Flynn arrived looking both nervous and excited. He asked Martin for permission to speak with Tessa privately, and her father agreed with a knowing smile. Flynn took her to their favorite spot on the ridge overlooking the valley. From here, they could see for miles, the red rock country stretching away in waves of color. Flynn dismounted and helped Tessa down, then stood before her, holding both her hands in his. "Tessa," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I know we have not known each other very long, only 6 months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are the most remarkable person I have ever met, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold ring set with a small sapphire. "It was my grandmother's," he said. "The only thing of value I own. Tessa O'Brien, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tessa felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes, Flynn, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the whole world seemed to disappear except for the two of them and the vast blue sky overhead. They were married in November, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Silver Reef. Tessa wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers. Flynn wore his best suit, and Tessa thought he had never looked more handsome. Martin O'Brien walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Flynn kissed her with such tenderness that Tessa felt her heart might burst. The reception was held at the town hall, and it seemed like everyone in Silver Reef attended, even Mrs. Prescott, who managed a tight smile and a grudging congratulations. The cowboys from the Harrison Ranch had come in force, and they toasted Flynn and Tessa with enthusiasm. Mr. Harrison himself, a gruff but fair man in his 60s, pulled Flynn aside and offered him a raise and a small house on the ranch property. "You are one of my best hands," Harrison said, "and your new wife deserves better than a bunkhouse. The place needs work, but it is sound, and it is yours for as long as you work for me." Flynn was overwhelmed by the generosity, and he clasped the older man's hand in gratitude. When he told Tessa, she threw her arms around his neck, not caring who saw. The little house was indeed in need of work, but Tessa threw herself into making it a home. She sewed curtains and scrubbed floors and planted a small garden. Flynn spent every spare moment repairing the roof and fixing the sagging porch and building furniture. It was hard work, but they did it together, and there was joy in the labor. Their first winter as a married couple was cold and challenging. Snow fell heavily in the high country, and Flynn often had to work long hours helping to move cattle to lower pastures and breaking ice on water troughs. Tessa worried about him when he was out in dangerous conditions, but she never complained. She kept the fire burning and hot meals ready, and when Flynn came home exhausted and half frozen, she would help him out of his cold, wet clothes and warm him with her own body beneath the quilts. They grew closer through those long winter months, learning each other in ways both physical and emotional. Tessa discovered that Flynn had nightmares sometimes, dreams that left him gasping and disoriented. He told her, haltingly, about the things he had seen during his travels, violence and hardship that had left scars on his soul. She held him through those dark nights, offering comfort and understanding, and gradually the nightmares came less frequently. Flynn, for his part, helped Tessa work through her own fears and doubts. She confessed to him one night that she sometimes felt guilty for being so happy, that she worried she was betraying her mother's memory by building a life so different from the one her mother had known. "Your mother would want you to be happy," Flynn told her. "Any parent would. You are not betraying her. You are honoring her by living fully and choosing love." Spring came, and with it new life. The garden Tessa had planted began to flourish, and she discovered she was pregnant. Flynn was overjoyed at the news, though he tried to hide his nervousness about becoming a father. Tessa reassured him, even as she dealt with her own anxieties about childbirth. Her father was delighted at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. He had been spending more time at their little house, clearly lonely in his own place now that Tessa had moved out. Flynn suggested that Martin move in with them, at least temporarily, and after some initial resistance, the older man agreed. It turned out to be a good decision. Martin was helpful around the house, and his presence eased Tessa's worries about being alone when Flynn had to be away for work. The baby was born in late autumn, a healthy boy with dark hair and eyes like his father. They named him Samuel, after Flynn's brother who had died young. Flynn held his son with a mixture of awe and terror, his big, rough hands so gentle as they cradled the tiny infant. "I will do better by you than my father did by me," Flynn whispered to the baby. "I swear it." Tessa watched them together and felt such a surge of love that it almost hurt. This was her family, this cowboy and this child, and she would do anything to protect them. The next few years passed in a blur of hard work and simple pleasures. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who followed his father everywhere. Flynn taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, settling the boy in front of him in the saddle and riding slowly around the corral. Tessa would watch from the porch, her heart in her throat but trusting Flynn to keep their son safe. Martin O'Brien continued to work as a mining consultant, but his health began to fail. A persistent cough that he had dismissed as a minor irritation grew worse, and the doctor diagnosed consumption. Tessa nursed him through his final months with devotion, and Flynn sat with him during the long nights, keeping him company when sleep would not come. Martin died in the spring of 1882, peaceful and at home, surrounded by the family he loved. His last words were to Flynn. "Take care of my girl," he whispered. "You are the son I never had." "I will, sir," Flynn promised. "Always." They buried Martin in the small cemetery outside Silver Reef, and Tessa grieved deeply. But she took comfort in knowing that her father had been happy in his final years, that he had seen her settled and loved, had known his grandson. Life continued. Flynn was promoted to foreman of the Harrison Ranch, a position that came with more responsibility but also more pay and security. They were able to save money and make improvements to their house. Tessa gave birth to a daughter in 1883, a red-haired girl they named Rose, who had her mother's blue eyes and her father's stubborn determination. Samuel doted on his baby sister, and Flynn was tender with his daughter in a way that made Tessa fall in love with him all over again. She would watch him rock Rose to sleep, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice, and marvel at how far they had both come from that terrifying day at the river. The river itself had become a special place for them. On their anniversary each year, they would ride out to the spot where Flynn had pulled Tessa from the water. The cottonwood tree was still there, older and more gnarled but standing strong, and they would sit beneath it and talk about their life together, about their dreams and hopes and the future they were building. "You ever regret it?" Flynn asked her once. "Marrying me instead of someone from your old life? Someone who could have given you an easier existence?" "Never," Tessa said firmly. "This life is not always easy, but it is real. What we have is real. I would not trade it for anything." She meant it with every fiber of her being. The woman she had been in St. Louis, constrained by expectations and social niceties, felt like a stranger. The woman she had become, strong and capable and deeply loved, was her true self. Silver Reef continued to grow and prosper. The silver mines produced steadily, and the town attracted more families, more businesses. A proper school was built, and Tessa volunteered as a teacher, finding joy in educating the children of miners and ranchers alike. Samuel attended her classes, proud to have his mother as his teacher, and little Rose would play in the corner with her dolls while Tessa led lessons in reading and arithmetic. Flynn's reputation grew as well. He was known as a fair foreman, tough but just, and the cowboys who worked under him respected him. He also gained a reputation as someone who could handle difficult situations. When disputes arose between ranchers, Flynn was often called in to mediate. When rustlers threatened the herds, Flynn organized the defense. He never sought confrontation, but he did not shy away from it either, and his quiet strength made him a natural leader. In 1885, Mr. Harrison offered to sell Flynn a portion of the ranch. The old man had no children of his own and had come to think of Flynn almost as a son. It was a generous offer, and though the price was more than fair, it was still a substantial sum. Flynn and Tessa talked long into the night about whether they should take the risk. "It is everything we have saved," Tessa said. "If something goes wrong, we could lose it all." "I know," Flynn said. "But this is a chance to build something that will last, something we can pass on to Samuel and Rose. I want to do this, but only if you are with me." Tessa thought about the frightened girl who had clung to a cottonwood branch, convinced she was going to die. She thought about the man who had ridden into the flood to save her, who had given her not just her life but a life worth living. She thought about the courage it took to reach for happiness, to take risks for the things that mattered. "Yes," she said, "let us do it." They bought 200 acres of prime grazing land and a small herd of cattle. It was exhausting work, running their own operation while Flynn continued to work as foreman for Harrison, but they were determined. Samuel, now 7 years old, took on chores appropriate to his age, feeding chickens and collecting eggs and learning to rope. Rose, at 3, was still too young to help much, but she loved being outside with her father and brother, and her laughter brightened even the hardest days. The ranch prospered. Flynn proved to be as good at managing his own operation as he had been at managing Harrison's. He made smart decisions about breeding and grazing, and he was meticulous about caring for the land. Tessa managed the financial side, keeping careful records and making sure they stayed within their means. It was a true partnership, each bringing their own strengths to the endeavor. By 1888, they had expanded their holdings to 400 acres and had a sizable herd. Flynn hired 2 hands to help with the work, young men eager to learn the ranching business. Samuel, now 10, was a capable rider and a real help around the ranch. Rose, at 6, attended the school where Tessa still taught, and showed signs of inheriting her mother's love of learning. Life was good, but it was not without challenges. Drought struck in the summer of 1889, the worst anyone could remember. Water sources dried up, and the grass turned brown and brittle. Cattle lost weight, and some ranchers lost their herds entirely. Flynn worked frantically to keep his animals alive, hauling water from increasingly distant sources and moving the herd to any patch of green he could find. Tessa watched him grow gaunt and exhausted, pushing himself to the limit. She tried to help where she could, bringing him food and water, taking on extra work so he could focus on the cattle. But it was a losing battle, and as the summer wore on, it became clear that they might lose everything. One evening in late August, Flynn came home looking defeated. He had just sold half the herd at a loss, unable to keep them alive any longer. He sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, and Tessa saw tears on his cheeks. "I have failed you," he said. "I have failed our children. We are going to lose the ranch." Tessa knelt beside him and took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "You have not failed anyone. You have done everything humanly possible, and we are not going to lose the ranch. We will find a way through this together." "How?" he asked, and there was such despair in his voice that it broke her heart. "I still have some jewelry from my mother that I have never sold. It should bring enough to get us through until the rains come. And they will come, Flynn. They always do." Flynn tried to protest, but Tessa was adamant. She took her mother's jewelry to the jeweler in town and sold it for enough money to buy feed and pay the hands through the autumn. It hurt to let go of those precious reminders of her mother, but she knew it was what her mother would have wanted. The rains finally came in October, drenching the parched land. The grass began to green up, and the remaining cattle regained their weight. It took time, but they slowly rebuilt the herd, and by the following spring they were on solid footing again. Flynn never forgot what Tessa had done. "You saved us," he told her. "Just like I pulled you from the river, you pulled us from ruin." "We save each other," Tessa said simply. "That is what love is." The children grew. Samuel became a young man of serious disposition and strong work ethic, clearly destined to take over the ranch someday. Rose proved to be brilliant and creative, constantly asking questions and dreaming up elaborate stories. When she was 12, she announced that she wanted to be a writer, and Tessa encouraged her, finding books and helping her practice her craft. In 1895, Tessa gave birth to another son, a surprise baby who arrived when she was 40 and had assumed her childbearing years were behind her. They named him Daniel, and he was a joyful, energetic child who kept his older siblings on their toes. Flynn, now in his early 40s, had silver threading through his dark hair, but he was as strong and capable as ever, and he delighted in his youngest child. Silver Reef had changed over the years. The silver began to play out in the early 90s, and many families moved on to other boom towns. But enough people stayed to keep the community alive, transitioning from mining to ranching and farming. The town became quieter but more stable, a real community rather than a transient mining camp. Tessa continued to teach, now in a better school building with more resources. She had educated 2 generations of children, and it gave her deep satisfaction to see her former students grown up, starting families and businesses of their own. Flynn became a respected elder statesman of the ranching community. Younger ranchers sought his advice, and he was generous with his knowledge. He also became involved in territorial politics, pushing for better schools and infrastructure. When Utah achieved statehood in 1896, Flynn was at the celebration in Salt Lake City, proud to be part of this new chapter in the territory's history. Time passed, marked by seasons and celebrations and the gradual accumulation of years. Samuel married at 23, bringing home a strong, capable young woman named Elizabeth who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on the ranch property and began raising their own children. Rose went away to college, one of the first women from Silver Reef to do so, studying literature and journalism. She returned to work for the local newspaper, writing articles that won praise throughout the state. Daniel grew into a thoughtful, gentle young man who loved animals and had a gift for healing. He studied to become a veterinarian, filling a much-needed role in the community. Through it all, Flynn and Tessa remained the center of their family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their love for each other, tested by time and hardship, had only grown stronger. They still rode out to the river on their anniversary, and they still sat beneath the old cottonwood, marveling at the life they had created together. On their 25th anniversary in 1904, Flynn gave Tessa a gift, a beautifully carved wooden box he had made himself. Inside was a letter written in his careful hand. "My dearest Tessa," it read. 25 years ago, I rode into a flood to save you, and in doing so, I saved myself. You have been my partner, my love, my very best friend. You have given me a family, a home, a purpose. Every day with you is a gift I never expected to receive. I love you more now than I did on the day we married, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. Yours always, Flynn. Tessa read the letter through tears, then kissed her husband with all the passion and tenderness she felt. They were older now, their bodies marked by time and labor, but the connection between them was as strong as ever. Life continued its inevitable march. Mr. Harrison died in 1906 at the age of 87, leaving the remainder of his ranch to Flynn in his will. It was an overwhelming inheritance, and it made Flynn one of the largest landowners in the region. He used his resources wisely, creating jobs and supporting local businesses, and his generosity was legendary. Samuel took over the day-to-day management of the ranch, proving himself a worthy successor to his father. Rose published a book of stories set in the Utah desert, which received critical acclaim and brought visitors to Silver Reef eager to see the landscapes she had described. Daniel opened a veterinary practice that served ranchers and farmers throughout the county. Tessa retired from teaching in 1908 at the age of 53, after 30 years in the classroom. The town held a celebration in her honor, and former students came from miles around to thank her for the education and encouragement she had given them. It was one of the proudest days of her life. She and Flynn settled into a gentler rhythm, spending more time together, traveling occasionally and doting on their growing number of grandchildren. They had 7 in total, with more on the way, and their house was often filled with the noise and chaos of young life. On a warm day in June of 1910, Flynn and Tessa rowed out to the river as they had done so many times before. They were both in their mid-50s now, still healthy and active but aware that their time was finite. They sat beneath the cottonwood tree, its branches now spreading wide, and looked out over the land they had made their own. "You remember how frightened you were?" Flynn asked, his arm around Tessa's shoulders. "Terrified," Tessa admitted. "I thought I was going to die." "And instead you lived," Flynn said. "We lived. We built this whole beautiful life together." "Because you were brave enough to ride into the current," Tessa said. "Because you took a risk for someone you did not even know." "Best decision I ever made," Flynn said. He turned to look at her, his dark eyes still as intense as they had been that rainy day so long ago. "I would do it again in a heartbeat. I would ride into any flood, face any danger for you." "I know," Tessa said, "and that is why I love you so much." They kissed, soft and sweet, and the river murmured its approval as it flowed past, no longer a barrier but a reminder of where their story had begun. The years that followed were peaceful and fulfilling. Flynn and Tessa watched their children succeed and their grandchildren grow. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, mourned the loss of old friends, and welcomed new members into their extended family. Their love remained constant, a beacon that guided them through whatever challenges arose. In 1915, on a crisp autumn evening, Flynn and Tessa sat on the porch of their home, wrapped in blankets and watching the sunset. Samuel and his family were nearby, and they could hear the laughter of children playing in the yard. Rose had come home for a visit, bringing her husband and 2 daughters. Daniel was expected for dinner along with his new wife. "We have been blessed," Flynn said quietly, "more than I ever imagined possible." "We have," Tessa agreed. She squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that time had not diminished. "I am grateful for every moment, even the flood," Flynn asked with a slight smile. "Especially the flood," Tessa said, "because it brought me you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Around them, their family gathered, drawn by the warmth of the home Flynn and Tessa had created. There was food and conversation, stories and laughter, the sound of a life well lived. Flynn and Tessa looked at each other, and in that glance was everything they had shared, all the years and struggles and triumphs, all the love that had sustained them through it all. They had started as strangers, brought together by circumstance and a raging river, and they had built something extraordinary. As the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars they had gazed at together for 36 years, Flynn pulled Tessa close and whispered, "Thank you for taking my hand that day." "Thank you for reaching out," Tessa whispered back. And there, surrounded by family and love, with the desert wind carrying the scent of sage and juniper, Flynn and Tessa Calhoun knew that their story, which had begun with danger and uncertainty, had become something timeless and true. They had faced floods and droughts, loss and hardship, but they had faced it all together, and that had made all the difference. Their legacy would continue through their children and grandchildren, through the ranch they had built and the community they had served. But more than that, their legacy was the love they had shared, a love that had started with a cowboy brave enough to ride into a current and a woman brave enough to trust him. It was a love that would endure long after they were gone, a story told and retold, of a flood and a rescue and two people who found in each other everything they had been searching for. It was a story of the Wild West, of harsh land and harder choices, but ultimately it was a story of hope and courage and the transformative power of love. And as Flynn and Tessa sat together under the stars, their hands intertwined, they knew that their story had been worth every moment, every challenge, every tear, and every smile. They had lived fully and loved deeply, and in the end, what more could anyone ask for? The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, expanding and adapting as the 20th century brought new challenges and opportunities. The techniques Flynn had pioneered were passed down, and the Calhoun name became synonymous with quality cattle and fair dealing throughout Utah and beyond. Rose's writing career flourished, and she published several more books, each one capturing the spirit of the West with authenticity and grace. She made sure her parents' story was preserved, writing a fictionalized account that became her most beloved work. Readers across the country were moved by the tale of a cowboy who rode into a flood to save a woman, and the love that grew from that moment of courage. Daniel's veterinary practice became an institution, serving the community for decades. He trained other veterinarians, sharing his knowledge and his father's philosophy of hard work and compassion. His children followed in his footsteps, carrying on the tradition of service. As Flynn and Tessa entered their 60s and then their 70s, they slowed down but never stopped. They remained active in the community, attending church services and town meetings, supporting causes they believed in. Flynn mentored young ranchers until the very end, and Tessa continued to read voraciously and discuss ideas with anyone who would listen. Their home remained a gathering place for the family. Every Sunday, the children and grandchildren would come for dinner, filling the house with noise and life. Flynn would carve the roast while Tessa supervised the side dishes, and they would all crowd around the big table Flynn had built decades earlier. After the meal, Flynn would tell stories of the old days, and the grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, barely able to imagine a time when Silver Reef was just a mining camp, and the West was still wild. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, the entire town of Silver Reef turned out to celebrate. There was a party at the town hall, with music and dancing and speeches praising the couple who had become beloved pillars of the community. Flynn, now 75, still stood tall and proud, though his hair was white and his face deeply lined. Tessa, at 72, was still beautiful, her blue eyes bright with intelligence and warmth. When called upon to speak, Flynn kept it simple. "I am not a man of many words," he said. "But I want to say this. 50 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I had ever met. She has been my partner in every sense of the word. She has made me a better man than I ever could have been alone. Tessa, I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and that is saying something, because I loved you pretty fiercely even then." The crowd erupted in applause, and Tessa rose to stand beside her husband. "Flynn rode into a flood to save me," she said, her voice still strong and clear. "But what he really did was give me a life. He gave me love and family and purpose. He taught me what it means to be brave, to face challenges head-on, to never give up. I am the luckiest woman in the world to have spent these 50 years with him." They kissed to thunderous applause and cheers, and then the band struck up a waltz. Flynn led Tessa onto the dance floor, and they moved together with the ease of long practice, two people who knew each other so completely that they moved as one. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. The Great Depression hit hard and many ranches failed, but the Calhoun operation survived thanks to careful management and the diversification Flynn had always insisted upon. They helped their neighbors where they could, extending credit and sharing resources, remembering the community support that had helped them through hard times. Flynn's health began to decline in his late 70s. His heart, the doctor said, was wearing out after decades of hard work. He was supposed to rest, to take it easy, but that was not in Flynn's nature. He still rode out to check on the cattle, still insisted on helping with repairs around the ranch. Tessa worried constantly, but she also understood that Flynn needed to be active, that resting would kill his spirit faster than exertion would kill his body. On a spring morning in 1934, Flynn woke early as always. He was 80 years old now, and every movement brought aches and pains, but he swung his legs out of bed and reached for his clothes. Tessa woke beside him, as she always did, her internal clock still synchronized with his after all these years. "Where are you going?" she asked, though she already knew. "Thought I would ride out to the river," Flynn said. "It has been a while." "I will come with you," Tessa said. They dressed slowly, helping each other with buttons and laces, and made their way to the barn. Samuel tried to insist that one of the hands accompany them, but Flynn waved him off. "I have been riding to that river for over 50 years, he said. "I think I can manage one more time." They rode slowly, Flynn on his old gelding and Tessa on her mare, both horses as aged as their riders but still willing and able. The morning was beautiful, with wildflowers blooming across the desert and birds singing in the scrub. They did not talk much, but they did not need to. After 55 years together, words were often unnecessary. When they reached the river, they dismounted carefully and walked to the cottonwood tree. It was ancient now, gnarled and weathered, but still standing strong. They sat in their usual spot, leaning against each other, and looked out over the water. The river was calm today, flowing peacefully between its banks, bearing no resemblance to the raging torrent it had been that fateful day. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if I had not come along?" Flynn asked. "No," Tessa said simply. "Because I did not have a life before you. I was existing but not living. You gave me life, Flynn. You gave me everything." Flynn turned to look at her, his dark eyes still sharp despite his age. "I am the one who got everything," he said. "You were the prize, Tessa. You were always the prize." They sat in silence for a while, watching the water flow past. Then Flynn spoke again, his voice soft. "I am tired, Tessa. More tired than I have ever been." Tessa felt her throat tighten with emotion. She knew what he was saying, what he was not quite saying. "I know," she whispered. "I am not afraid," Flynn said. "I have had a good life, better than I ever deserved, and I have had you. That is more than any man could ask for." "Do not talk like that," Tessa said, though tears were running down her cheeks. "You are not going anywhere, not yet." But Flynn knew better. He could feel his body failing, could sense the end approaching. He was not ready to leave Tessa, would never be ready, but he also knew that some things were beyond his control. They stayed by the river for hours, talking about their life together, remembering the good times and the hard times, the children they had raised and the love they had shared. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Flynn took Tessa's hand. "Promise me something," he said. "Anything," Tessa replied. "Promise me you will keep living, really living. Do not give up just because I am gone. Our children and grandchildren need you. The world needs you." "I promise," Tessa said, though the words felt like broken glass in her throat. Flynn smiled, a beautiful, peaceful smile. "That is my girl," he said. Then he leaned his head against hers, and they watched the sunset together one last time. Flynn Calhoun died peacefully in his sleep 2 nights later, with Tessa holding his hand. He was 80 years old, and he had lived a full, rich life. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, ranchers and townspeople and old cowboys who had worked with Flynn over the decades. They spoke of his integrity, his fairness, his courage, and his kindness. But mostly they spoke of his love for Tessa, a love that had been a constant in an ever-changing world. Tessa grieved deeply, as anyone would after losing their partner of 55 years. There were days when the pain was so intense she could barely breathe, when she did not know how she would go on without him. But she had made a promise, and she intended to keep it. She stayed active in the ranch operations, advising Samuel and taking joy in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, of which there were now many. She continued to read and learn, and she wrote down her memories of Flynn and their life together, creating a record for future generations. She lived to be 93 years old, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. When she died peacefully in her sleep in 1950, her family mourned but also celebrated, knowing that she was finally reunited with the man she had loved for so many years. They buried Tessa next to Flynn in the cemetery outside Silver Reef, under a simple headstone that read, "Flynn and Tessa Calhoun." He rode into the current to reach her, and together they built a life of love. The ranch continued under Samuel's children, and then their children, adapting and thriving through the changing decades. The story of Flynn and Tessa became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. Rose's book about them was rediscovered in the 1970s and republished, finding a new audience hungry for stories of authentic Western romance. The old cottonwood tree by the river, the tree that had saved Tessa's life and witnessed the beginning of their love story, stood for many more years. It became a landmark, a place where people would visit to reflect on courage and love and the power of one person to change another's life forever. And though Flynn and Tessa were gone, their legacy remained. It lived in the ranch they had built, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren they had raised, in the community they had served, and in the love they had shared. It was a legacy that proved that sometimes the most important moments in life come when someone is brave enough to ride into the current, to take a risk for someone else, to believe that love is worth any danger. Their story became more than just a family tale. It became a reminder that real love, the kind that lasts a lifetime and beyond, is built on courage and trust and the willingness to face whatever storms come together. It was a story of the Wild West, yes, but more importantly, it was a story of the human heart and its infinite capacity for love. And in the end, is that not what matters most? Not the challenges we face or the hardships we endure, but the love we give and receive, the connections we forge, the lives we touch. Flynn and Tessa Calhoun understood that. They lived it every day of their long life together. They were not perfect people, and their life was not always easy, but they loved each other with everything they had, and that made all the difference. Their story lives on, a testament to the power of a single moment of courage, a single decision to reach out and save someone, and the beautiful, complicated, wonderful life that can grow from that moment. It is a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth cherishing. It is a story of love in its purest, most enduring form, and that is a story that never gets old.